Yeah, I think we can probably just talk about it.
Welcome into another week of the D3 Datacast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, d3datacast.com. Thanks to our Patreon supporters who help us to create these episodes. Zach, we've had another week of Division 3 basketball. We talk a lot about ranked teams, teams that are getting top 25 votes, but there's a bunch of other really great teams out there that are not getting top 25 votes. Maybe they will in future weeks. But I think that's what we're going to bring some light to today. Some of these best teams without top 25 votes. That's coming up in a few minutes. Right now, though, let's get into our 4-point play. Are you ready just to jump into D3 basketball this week, Zach?
Let's jump into it. Yes, let's go. We're going to start off with our 4-point play in the North. Kick us off here, Matt, as you always do. What do you want to put forth in the North here as we start off our 4-point play?
Yeah, Zach, I'm going to talk about Calvin this week. I never know how much to talk about Calvin on this show. That's our alma mater. A lot of people know that. But I'm kind of conscious about maybe talking about them too much, so I probably swing too far in the other direction. But I think we have to talk about the Calvin Knights this week. They delivered one of this week's signature wins, I think, when they beat number 17 UW Oshkosh by the score of 89-52 on Saturday. Calvin was effective scoring in the paint. They were effective from outside. They had 5 players score in double figures, but I think the story of this game was the Calvin defense. They held UW Oshkosh to under 27% shooting from the field. Calvin's defense is now the number 2 rated defense by our efficiency ratings. They've been playing really well the last few games. It was an opening night loss on the road at Denison. That was their only blemish. Since then, they've been really strong, and I think getting better as the weeks have gone on. Their defense, like I said, number 2. That's behind only defending national champions Trinity, Connecticut. So I think we saw a lot of great things from Calvin this past weekend. If they can keep that up, maybe they are like a top 10, top 5-ish maybe team in the country. We'll have to see. Don't want to get too excited about one game, but it was one of Saturday's 2 kind of top 25 versus top 25 games. And it was a big scoring margin. So great to see from our Calvin Knights, a game we were very excited about. And a team now didn't know what to make of them going into the year. I wasn't sure. Are they number 5? Are they number 35? Right. I was voting them kind of around number 15 the last several weeks. They might be moving up on my top 25 ballot. We'll have to see where they are featuring in other people's top 25 ballots as well come Monday.
It's very interesting with Oshkosh playing a new style where they're running line changes, substitutions, 5 in, 5 out at, a couple minutes at a time, really trying to pressure you. And, we have enough experience watching Calvin basketball that hasn't always gone well. So it's very much a case of like, what was this going to be like? But I think you're right. While all the storylines or, narratives going in would be all about how the Calvin offense would handle that pressure defense from Oshkosh, I think the way the game played out was very much about Oshkosh's inability to score the basketball, and in addition to Calvin really handling the pressure very well. Uh, Matt, I was really thinking back over the last couple years. I put this win in the category of like there was a really big game against Trine where Calvin got out to like a 21-2 lead, or the Sweet 16 game a couple years ago against Randolph Macon at Trinity, where it was just like, a huge game going in, and then to get like a performance that just is so satisfying, so maybe unexpectedly good. That's how I felt coming out of this Oshkosh game.
Yeah, for sure. I was nervous the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then after I think a stretch of the game was maybe a 29-0 run for Calvin, and from that point on, it was kind of smooth sailing. Now they played hard. It wasn't like they took the foot off the gas, but yeah, one of these performances you don't expect. Just based on the level of the two teams, right? I think Oshkosh is probably still good. I think they're going to win a lot of games in the WIAC. That's a tight conference. You don't know, are they the second best team there or the fifth best? There's a whole bunch of great teams in the middle there. But I think this was more of a really great Calvin game than it was like Oshkosh is not a good team.
Yeah, Matt, in the north here, I want to talk about a WIAC school as well here. And we've maybe kind of talked about this already in the weeks of the season, but it looks like a season where fans are going to have to get used to getting comfortable with trying to sort through some results that don't really seem to make sense. And I think we saw that A really good example of that this week with UW Stout, of course, coming off last week where they had a really big road win at Illinois Wesleyan, going on the road, knocking off a top 25 team, a team that really seemed to be gaining some momentum in the top 25 versus their preseason ranking. Stout goes in there, gets the win. But Matt, they go home then to take on a previously winless UW Superior team, and they lost. And it would be one thing if you kind of look at the box score and be like, "Oh yeah, you can tell, they didn't play well." But there's actually some things that suggest the opposite, right? Stout shot 50% from 3 against Superior. They had more assists than turnovers, so it wasn't like they were booting the ball around the court. I mean, it's just another example like we've talked about already. There's just a lot of teams that are capable of beating a lot of teams, but then also if it's the wrong night, capable of losing to a lot of teams, right? I think that was on full display with Stout coming out of that road win against a top 25 opponent, only to go home and then lose to the team previously winless, currently ranked number 300 in the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings. I think, hate to make it sound like we're picking on Stout here, but again, I think this is the kind of year where there's just going to be some of those games where you look at a team and you're like, how did that game happen? But there's a lot of teams that have overlapping, kind of absolute team quality. If they're playing their A game, they can beat just about anyone. And maybe Superior was playing their A game. It didn't seem like Stout played particularly bad, but just kind of in the context of what they were just coming off of, pretty shocking to see. But that's what's going to make this, I think, a really fun year of Division III basketball.
Yeah, I think this year is shaping up to be, if you want to know the story of the 25-26 Division III basketball season, just paste UW Stout's schedule and results page. I think they have two wins on the season, and it's Maranatha Baptist, who's one of the lowest rated teams in Division III, and Illinois Wesleyan, who's been a team in the top 25 all season long. When you have teams right in the middle this year, they're going to beat teams on the top end, and they're going to maybe lose some games that are head scratchers. UW Superior, not one of the higher rated teams, but I think that's what's going to be this year. It's not saying really too much about Stout or about Illinois Wesleyan or about UW Superior. It's just if you're a middling team, UW Stout, right? They're kind of always right in the middle of Division III. You're going to be able to reach up and beat a top 25 team on the right night, and then you're going to turn around and it's the transitive score path through this season is going to be the shortest as it's ever been.
Right. That's exactly it. You're not going to be able to take kind of those comparable opponents or, common games and make a whole lot of sense of it. You're really going to have to look at the big picture. And I think that's what's going to make it fun and going to make it really difficult for someone like you and the other top 25 voters who have to ultimately, take a 1 through 25 and put names in certain places. All right, let's move to the East, Matt. Who you looking at there in the East this past week?
Yeah, out East, Johns Hopkins is now firmly on my radar. They've recorded a pair of really nice wins this week. The Blue Jays held court versus Hood on Tuesday. They won 93-89. Hood is ranked number 21 in the country, or they were this last week. We'll have to see where they end up on Monday. Then they turned around and beat conference rival Swarthmore in a non-conference game, 76-69. It's been a solid resume for Johns Hopkins so far this year. They're now 6-1. Their only loss is a 3-point road loss, I believe, to York, Pennsylvania. That's the team I've been voting for in York. They haven't quite cracked the top 25, but they're getting a bunch of votes. They've been one of the teams on the outside. There could be a team, right, that gets in this week on Monday when this episode drops. So we'll have to see. But Johns Hopkins' offense, I think, has been really on point this year. And like in the Hood game in particular, they got 17 offensive rebounds, gave themselves a bunch of extra cracks at those second chance points. I think they took 10 more shots than Hood did in that game. And in a close game, every shot matters, right? So giving yourself second chance opportunities was really big for Johns Hopkins in this game. We know they're always in the mix kind of there in the Centennial. This year looks like it's no different. Johns Hopkins is, I think, one of the favorites there. And I think a team that is going to be getting more and more top 25 consideration as we go.
Yeah, I think so. If they were a team a year ago that, we're one of those teams that maybe had a little bit more variability in their results. You'd see something that you really like and then something that maybe you didn't really like. Seems like they're maybe getting a little bit more consistency so far this year. Going to be interesting to see if they can kind of keep that going throughout the year. That's kind of my early impression of what Hopkins has done so far this season. All right, in the East, Matt, here, I think it's time to start talking about Cortland. something we will do a little later in the show as you kind of tease our main topic here. But they had already caught my eye earlier in the week with a double overtime win over Oswego State on Friday. The Red Dragons lost their season opener in a close game at Rochester, another team who's off to a good start here. So nothing to shake a stick at there. They've won 6 in a row since then, including a pair of SUNYAC wins over the weekend, including that Oswego State win I mentioned. And I got to say, right now they probably look like the favorites in the SUNYAC, and I think they've got a chance to, really look like they have a chance to make some waves nationally. They don't play now until after Christmas, but coming out of that break, they're going to finish up the non-conference portion of their schedule with a couple interesting, cross-region games that maybe we don't usually see from a team like Cortland. They're going to take a trip down to Florida where they'll play Dubuque, a team who maybe has, tried to get themselves in that top 25 conversation themselves, and Gustavus Adolphus, kind of another one of those teams. So going to be some really interesting measuring stick games against probably some, kind of similar type teams, some teams that are, maybe on the fringe of that top 25 situation so far, but probably deserves some consideration there. Matt, I think it's like the third year a coach is at a program is when you can really start to see maybe what that program is going to be under the coach. And that's the case with the Red Dragons under Mo Kearney, his third year there, and they seem to be really taking a nice step forward so far. But again, we'll talk more
Yeah.
about them a little bit, so maybe we kind of hold off. But they're one that had my eye earlier in the week before we even kind of fleshed this all out.
Yeah. Timely inclusion for you there, Zach.
For sure. All right, let's head south. Always interesting to talk about what's going on in the South.
Yeah, Randolph-Macon, a team that gets almost no attention nationally in Division III basketball. But they had maybe the best week. I didn't go back and look at everyone's week from the season, but if you look at who had best weeks of the year so far, this week that Randolph-Macon just came off of, I think was right up there. They beat Hampton-Sydney 85-50 and then beat Roanoke 66-61. Both home games, but they're both top 25 wins. One of them by a huge margin, that game against Hampton-Sydney by 35 points. It's been a year where I've thought at a lot of times that no one's going to catch Trinity, Connecticut, right? They're the defending national champions. They look great in the early season. The computers love them. The humans love them. But I think a team that wants to give them a run for their money is Randolph-Macon. They're a senior-laden team. They've got a lot of experience. Stop me if you've heard this one before. They look like they could be the class of the ODAC. They could be right there in the top of the national mix. I know they've been voted highly, so this is not a revelation. But Randolph-Macon looks good. What they did to Hampton-Sydney was surprising earlier in the week. Just that big number. I mentioned, Calvin's big number against UW-Oshkosh was one of the signature games of the week. This was probably maybe the single signature game of the week. Just Hampton-Sydney, I think, is really good. And they destroyed them as well, 35 points. So Randolph-Macon is here. They may be making a challenge to Trinity. I'm probably not making a change at the top of my top 25 ballot right now, but Randolph-Macon's good. I'm here to tell everyone for the first time.
And what's interesting is I think a lot is made, and obviously so far maybe too much, that Randolph-Macon doesn't have a lot of size. And we'll see if it ever comes to a head-to-head between Randolph-Macon and Trinity. But I think that's a matchup that maybe that wouldn't necessarily hurt Randolph-Macon, right? Like I think that would be an interesting, when you think about the way those teams play and are built. Like I don't think that's necessarily a matchup where you would give Trinity a big advantage over Randolph-Macon because Randolph-Macon doesn't have that size. It's not like them going up against a Jalen Overway a couple years ago in the tournament where they just didn't have anyone who could match up with them, and they just got basically destroyed on the inside, right? I don't think it's that kind of matchup. Now, we'll see if they could actually mount a challenge to a Trinity team that is just, they haven't done anything wrong, and like, yeah, I'm still surprised they weren't a unanimous number one. Now, one of those number one votes was going to Randolph-Macon, and again, if you look at something like a 35-point win over Hampton-Sydney, maybe they're very deserving of that as well.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, for mine, I'm going to stick in the ODAC too, Matt, but you'd be forgiven for overlooking an Eastern Mennonite program that's had a rough go of it in recent years, but I thought they had a pretty interesting 0-2 week. Maybe that's not how the word they would use necessarily, but this week they played at Virginia Wesleyan, and they had a home game against Hampton-Sydney to kick off ODAC play for them. That's a pretty tough start for an Eastern Mennonite program that's won just 6 ODAT games over the last 3 seasons. But it was just a 5-point loss at Virginia Wesleyan in a game that was tied with just over a minute to go. And then they were actually up 2 on Hampton Sydney with 16 seconds left. Hampton Sydney goes the length of the court for a game tying layup. With just a few seconds left, then they get a steal, kind of a poke from behind steal, and then a buzzer beating attempt doesn't go, but they draw a foul, hit a couple game winning free throws with zero point 0.8 seconds left. It's a heartbreaker for Eastern Mennonite, but shows the kind of team that they could be one of those teams that we talked about, kind of in the open of this segment. One of those teams that pops up and they get someone, and that later on you're looking at like, how did they lose to this team, or just that this game doesn't make sense. I don't know what to do with it. They almost got that right there with Hampton Sydney. Don't be surprised if maybe they do pop off for one of those later this season.
Yeah, and it's like we said, it's going to be that type of a year where a team like Eastern Mennonite is going to get some of those wins. I saw both of those scoring margins, and those are the games where you're usually like, well, that's a little closer than you thought, and you kind of ding the maybe Virginia Wesleyans and Hampton Cities of the world. But this is a year of any year, right? Don't apologize for a win this year. If you get a win, it seems like it's a big accomplishment, and just kind of move on and say, we came out of that one.
Mm-hmm. It's that survive and advance mentality all throughout the regular season. That's not just going to be a tournament
Yeah.
mantra, right? That's
Yeah.
going to be kind of the theme of the year. All right, let's head out west. Matt, who caught your eye out west this week?
Yeah, Chapman has started strong in SCIAC play. They had two 12-point wins this week to start their conference competition. On Saturday, they defeated Pomona Pitzer 80-68. But the big one for them of this week was back on Wednesday night. They beat Redlands 75-63. That was the fifth-ranked Redlands Bulldogs' first defeat of the season. It's really early. These were both home games for Chapman. They haven't played Claremont Mudscripts yet, so several caveats here, but that's two really good wins for Chapman. I don't think that they were in my upper tier. They're going to be contenders for the SCIAC this year. I think Redlands seemed like they were going to be the big favorite. Claremont Mudscripts in recent weeks has kind of maybe joined them, but here's two really good wins for Chapman. And I think they have to be serious early contenders in the SCIAC race, right? If you're already 2-0, you've beaten maybe one of the other top contenders. A lot of games left, right? Lots of things can happen, but Chapman looks serious right now. That's a really good start for them. In beating Redlands, I think one thing we've talked about is kind of this Redlands theory. Their unique style gives non-conference teams a lot of trouble. Maybe when they get in the SCIAC, though, people are used to it. The coaching staff can really coach their players. Their players have seen games against this. They know not to panic right away, don't get out of sorts. It's still difficult, right? So Chapman has a great win here. Wonder if this says something about what we might see with Redlands not having quite as much success in the conference as they've had outside of the conference.
And going back to the Calvin Oshkosh result, kind of gives credence, I think, to the conference factor, the SCIAC factor there with Redlands, right? Totally different, but both in the pregame interview with assistant coach Derek DeVries and in the post game with Bill Saul, the point was made how big of a thing it was for Calvin to have a full week. They didn't have a midweek game, so how big of a thing it was for them to have a full week to prepare for that kind of style that Oshkosh is playing. Maybe a little bit reminiscent of how Redlands plays, right? And so all the more if having a week was a big deal, all the more if you kind of see them twice a year, year in, year out, how that can kind of build a little bit of an advantage to help you deal with that kind of thing. So I thought that was interesting, kind of going back. Even in the pregame, it was mentioned how big of a deal it was to get them prepared to have that full week. So that kind of made me think about this. I know you've talked a lot about the Redlands factor in the SCIAC and how it seems to work a little bit better with unfamiliarity.
Yeah.
But hey, come tournament time, you get outside of conference play, especially if you win that first game and you've got to turn around and you can catch someone the next day. That I think that kind of thing is where Redlands really has an advantage.
Yeah, don't play Redlands on the second night of a tournament back to back.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I don't know if this is cheating out for my West point here on the 4-point play, Matt. We're going to talk about the SLIAC, kind of the western side of what we'll call the contiguous D3 map, the non-island schools. And the SLIAC was one of the conferences that we didn't touch. No one wanted to touch the SLIAC in our way too early preseason conference champion draft. I know in the prep that I did, I was really looking at the D3 Datacast preseason efficiency ratings, and there was like 3 teams that had no separation between them. So I didn't want to make that kind of call and make what seemed at that time like a risky pick on a SLAC team. But Matt, here we are a month into the season. I think we can comfortably say, or I'll come out and just comfortably say that Webster looks like a clear favorite in the SLIAC. They caught my eye earlier in the week, just seeing the kind of efficiency rating margin that they had opened up on the rest of the conference there, and then I think that was really proven out in their game against Wash U on Saturday. It did end up being a loss, but it was a game they led most of the way, including by a margin as that got as high as 17. Unfortunately for them, WashU climbed back, took a lead with a little over 6 minutes to go, and never gave it back. But Webster playing that kind of game against WashU really solidified that what was showing up that I saw earlier in the week compared to the rest of the conference in the efficiency ratings, was real. They kind of took that against quality, legitimate top 25 team, and really we're right there with them. So get them into conference play, Matt. I think they're the cream of the crop there in the SLAC. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. But if we were doing the draft today, I think I'd have Webster high
Yeah.
in my board.
Yeah, I definitely had to tune into the end of that game against WashU because that was kind of right down to the wire last few minutes. WashU kind of flipped the script and took the game back over as far as leading the score. But yeah, I didn't have Webster leading WashU most of the game on my bingo card. Zach, but St. Louis I think is the gateway to the West, so we will definitely allow this one for the West on your 4-point play here.
That's right. So it's another action-packed week. Another week we'll get a fresh top 25 poll. So let's take a look at what you've got here for your ballot this week, Matt.
Yeah, so here's the ballot that I'm currently working on for D3Hoops.com. A new poll will be released on Monday afternoon. So yes, staying at the top, Trinity, Connecticut, Randolph-Macon, UW, La Crosse, those teams have not changed. Despite the close game, Zach, that we just talked about with Webster, WashU has not really changed position too much on my ballot. We just talked about, never apologize for a loss this year. Never apologize for a win. You can apologize for losses. Never apologize for a win this year. Especially teams have taken like losses. If your mulligan at this point is you just won by a little bit too close of a margin, that's kind of okay for now. So let's see how they're doing. So I'm still hanging in there with WashU at 4. Mary Washington at number 5 moves up a couple of spots here, and then Calvin is a team we've talked about so far in this episode. I'm at number 6 with them. They've looked really good so far this year, especially the last couple of weeks. Chicago at number 7, Emory at number 8. Mount Union is a team that keeps rising on my list here. They had some good wins in the OIC this week. They're at number 9. Tufts back in the top 10 at number 10. They had that 0-2 start to the season. Since then, I believe that they are undefeated, playing well. Catholic at 11, Roanoke at 12, despite a close loss to Randolph-Macon. I think Roanoke has played a lot of good teams. Difficult schedule. I think they're still right in the mix for me. We'll have to see if they can, pull off a win like that here coming up. Number 13 is Wesleyan. Number 14, Claremont Mud Scripps. They come in, take a jump up in my ballot here. WPI, number 15, they're a team that has yo-yoed in and out of my ballot. They had a really good week, I think, beating Babson and Clark, if I try to remember off the top of my head. So a couple of good results for WPI this week. York, Pennsylvania at 16, Johns Hopkins at 17. Hampton-Sydney's, even despite that big margin we talked about, they stay in my top 25 at number 18. Redland stays in as well at number 19. Hood and Illinois Wesleyan at 20 and 21, two teams that took losses this week that do remain in my top 25. UW Eau Claire at 22. I would have liked to move them up, actually, ideally, but they're a team that still hasn't really played anyone, so I'm not going to move them up really yet at this point. I'm still a little bit of a wait and see on moving UW Eau Claire up higher. Endicott at 23. They've been in my top 25 for a while. And then two new teams for me, I believe. Montclair State for the first time. I was kind of late on the Montclair State train. They're at 24. And St. Thomas, Texas at 25.
So before we started recording, Matt, you talked about that you kind of put this one together maybe a little bit more on vibes than you typically do. Just kind of drawing on some of the things we've already talked about as you started recording here. I'm guessing Trinity was an easy number one for you, with Randolph Macon just kind of a very easy number two, and then maybe you kind of started to think about it a little bit after that. Is that kind of how maybe the thinking part of it really started kind of from three down?
Yeah, three to me, we're still kind of locked in this week. Although UW Lacrosse struggled with a Ripon team that has been, Ripon was in that game, leading that game for a while. UW Lacrosse did win by 10, but that was a little bit of a one I was following for a while. But yeah, those three were still really locked in. Then I had some decisions to make, really around, let's call it 14 is a bunch of teams that feel like 14 is kind of too high. But yeah, you have to list all the teams there. So really, again, I think I've said this for weeks, but like 14 to 35 or so is probably pretty even. But in that mix, I have teams like what I meant when I'm filling up my bracket based on vibes is Hampton City took a big loss. Illinois Wesleyan had an overtime win and a loss. They have a starter that's injured. I'm still trying to think, not just react to this week's results necessarily in a vacuum, but also if we started and kept playing next week, who would I expect to win games? Who would I expect to be good? Who would I expect to advance in a tournament, let's say? So some of these teams are in here, right, despite losses, because I think the team is still good, right? I was hanging in there on Tufts earlier in the season, even when they didn't really seem like they had it, felt like they've been rolling a little bit more. So I think some of these other teams, Hampton Sydney and others, I think that they still got a lot of quality there, and they're going to keep rolling as the season goes on.
Matt, St. Thomas is an interesting one. I want to ask you about, of course, probably the big win this past week over
Trinity.
Trinity. Um, Puts them in here, but they also had a pretty good weekend at the La Plata
Yeah.
Classic at Wash U. It had a win over Whitewater and then a 1 point loss against the host Wash U there. Probably a team that maybe you kind of had on the outside, and then that Trinity win kind of solidified things for you. Is that kind of does that make sense for how you thought about giving them your last spot there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think
And,
that they're a
and
team that's
maybe and
now.
maybe and maybe you could argue that even at 25, like they're a team, that could have been, higher up.
Oh yeah, and I think you start thinking about a team like St. Thomas, Texas, all the way up at like 15 or so, and you just try to slot them in and think of, okay, trying to get my teams in order. I think all those teams are really tight. But yeah, St. Thomas is putting together a nice resume. That close loss, right? It's tough to like, is that a resume builder? But it showed that they were able to compete with a team like Wash U, and I thought Wash U was pretty highly rated for me. But then get that win like against Trinity, Texas this week, I think that's a good win to have under your belt. So yeah, St. Thomas, Texas at 25, but really all those teams pretty even there.
And then just some of the other games I think that had a big impact that we've already talked about. Calvin moves up for you. Oshkosh moves out. They were in your
Yeah.
ballot at number 23 a week ago. I'm assuming, we talk about sometimes you see result and it maybe speaks, more to the positive about, one side than really saying anything negative. I'm guessing the margin there has a lot to kind of, stretching those two teams. Um, Versus like a Johns Hopkins Hood situation that you talked about earlier, where Hopkins kind of makes the big move in. Hood does come down a little bit for you, but going from like 15 to 20, it's not like you're going to be yanking them out necessarily because they lost to Hopkins.
Yeah.
Maybe that is as a result that says more to you about Hopkins than like making you feel worse about Hood.
Yeah, exactly. And margins are a big deal, right? If you lose a game that you're kind of expected to, like for Oshkosh, that was a road game at a higher ranked team. Like they were supposed to probably lose that game. But what is surprising is the margin. So that's why they fell out. And look, they're a team that could be back in a few weeks if they get some results. And I already mentioned, I think that they could be one of those top half of the WIAC teams. So you don't want to overreact even to a big margin or one game or whatever. But yeah, moving teams around, that's the difference there between like a Hood and an Oshkosh this week.
Mm-hmm. But that's what's going to happen. You talk about kind of needing to see more from Eau Claire in terms of the opposition. Oshkosh has played a tough schedule
Yeah,
so far,
yeah.
and when you do that, you open
You're going to
yourself
get
up
some.
to taking a few losses like they have. But kind of that risk reward game. Of course, we're talking about WIAC schools here in particular. They're going to get into conference play, and we're going to find out an awful lot. There's no ducking anyone when you're playing in a league like that. So those games will definitely come for some of those
Yeah.
teams. We'll just have to wait and see. All right, Matt. Anything else you want to talk about? The top 25 picture or your ballot before we move into this week's topic, which very much has to do with the voting dynamics as we've seen so far this season.
No, I mean we kind of talked about it. My top three were locked in. To me, really though, there's the two teams at the top, and then it's kind of like 8 or 10 teams kind of next, and then it's kind of like 15 or 20 teams next. That's kind of how I'm kind of seeing the tiers develop. So I think that's just maybe interesting to say that I kind of like it's Trinity, and then it's Randolph Macon, and then it's kind of the Peloton after that, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, so let's talk about some of the best teams that have not received any top 25 votes yet this season. As we look at the preseason top 25, we look at the week 1 and the week 2 D3Hoops.com top 25. There's been a total of 71 different teams that have been named on at least one ballot. We're not going to read them all off, but for the sake of our video listener or watchers, there are the 71 listed there. Um, so what we want to take a look at, who are the best teams that haven't cracked anyone's ballot yet, and with 71 teams, you might think, oh yeah, all the teams that are really worthy or are relevant, 71, that's a lot. Surely they've all been kind of picked up. But Matt, this is a topic we've done in recent years, and let's take a quick look back at last year when we did this at the same time where we were dealing with 3 polls. And actually, I was a little bit surprised at this because I figure, oh, there's so much depth. There's so many teams that could beat so many other teams. Well, there was actually more teams that were named on ballots last year than there have been so far this year, where there's been 71. Last season, as we did this, there were 79 teams that had been named on ballots. And even though that list went even deeper, we looked at 10 teams that at that time were ranked in the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings top 50 that hadn't received any votes. They were Amherst, Ohio Northern, Hamilton, a tournament team,
Yeah.
Mary Washington, a tournament team,
Sweet 16.
St. Joseph's, Maine, a tournament team, University of Chicago, a tournament team who did end up getting ranked, Ferrum, who was sort of like the one team that was in like the middle class of the ODAC. You kind of had a big gulf there between like the teams at the top and the teams at the bottom. Mary Hardin Baylor, who did get in the top 25, DeSales, and then Montclair State, who I think topped out at the first out in the others receiving votes. But again, another tournament team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I look at this, okay, only 2 of them actually ended up getting into the top 25. 5 of them did end up getting top 25 votes, but it was a pretty good list. I mean, at least I think you'd have to say, 50-50 in terms of just kind of relevance to the national picture.
6 out of the
as
10
that
made the
season played
tournament.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So kind of a fun look here. So we're going to take a look at 10 more, 10 outside of that group of 71 who have been named on ballots. And hey, history suggests there's kind of a 50-50 shot that some of these teams will be, end up tournament teams, or some of the ones you see here from a year ago that were very much deserving to be on the radar. So let's start off, Matt, with the top team in the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings that has not yet received a top 25 vote. And that's actually the computer's number 4 team so far, Amherst.
Yeah, we're just going to rename this episode, if we end up doing it every year, just the Amherst episode, because this is going to be their this is always their high water mark of the season, so we'll see how it is this year. But the computer loves them this year so far. Number 4 team by our D3Datacast.com efficiency ratings. They're 7-1 on the season. And actually, Zach, while I talk, can you remind? Oh, it was Springfield. I didn't record it here. They've lost to Springfield. But they've otherwise won all their games by large margins. But Zach, I don't think they've played anyone else that our computer sees as in the top 100. I think that their highest rated game was a win over number 105 Rutgers Camden. Like we said, they've lost one game, kind of I guess outside of that top 100 mix that I failed to record on the screen here. But it's been big. Mostly, it's been big margins against kind of lower ranked teams. You'd like to see more. I know they're going to get a bunch of quality in the NESCAC, but you'd like to see more out of a program like Amherst. But that's not what we're seeing right now. So this is, I think, a question you're going to ask me. I'm just going to answer it now. I'm not voting for Amherst. I'm not considering voting for them. I know it's a big name program, and I do give deference to programs that can reload and be good. They've got to prove it to me against someone before I start voting for them, especially at 7-1 with a kind of non-top 100 loss. I don't really care what the margins are outside of that. I'm not really an Amherst believer right now.
We talked about it even a little bit last week. But as you mentioned, there's some history here, and so this is very much a fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me situation here with Amherst. Again, looking at a non-conference strength of schedule according to our efficiency ratings, Amherst has played the 315th ranked schedule so far, and they're not even undefeated against it, right, Matt? So clearly, the computer is valuing beating bad teams by just in some cases, like 40 plus
Yeah.
point margins. And we've seen in the past how that can be instructive, that can be meaningful. Over the last couple years, the computer was, ahead of maybe human opinion on the Trinity Bantams that are now defending national champions and two-time Final Four participants. The same thing kind of played out last year with Wesleyan, where they were beating up on subpar competition and proved to be a Final Four contender. But looking back, the level of competition wasn't this bad,
Yeah.
and so we'll have to see what happens when you're playing, the 315th ranked schedule, and you're not even undefeated against it. Yeah, you can't. What are you voting for? I think this is one where you're going to see some major corrections by the computer. And Matt, I think you were even seeing some of those dynamics play out just with teams they've played kind of
Yeah.
underperforming, their computer projection for that one game.
Yeah, I was updating scores on, I think it was Tuesday night. Elms, who Amherst has beaten, played a game where they kind of underperformed their computer expectation by a significant margin, and then that dropped Amherst's efficiency margin by like a half a point or a full point or something like that. So it depends on the teams that they've played and who they've played, but Amherst is going to see a big step up in quality, at least when they get into NESCAC play. And probably computer's not going to lie at that point. So are they still winning games, or are they still in the mix against other good teams? We'll have to see. For now, I'm not buying it until they play someone else, though. I think we've covered that.
I think that's fair. All right, next up, Matt, team I highlighted in our 4-point play, Cortland.
Yeah, Cortland is the number 14 team as of Sunday evening by the D3Datacast.com efficiency ratings. They're 6-1, kind of a plus 22 efficiency margin, so that's really strong there. Offensively and defensively, they're both in the top 50 by our efficiency metrics. Against teams in the top 50, they've beaten St. Joseph, Connecticut. I think that was a neutral site game. They lost at Rochester, a UAA team, probably like a mid-pack-ish UAA team, but that's such a deep league that's what the computer thinks is a number 30 team. And then they beat Oswego State, who is just inside the top 50 as well. They also have a win at Farmingdale State, who's a top 100 team at number 59. So four top 100 type games here. They've won 3 of them. I would assume the other games that they've all won their other games, but probably by pretty big margins as well. So Cortland is the type of team who is putting up good computer numbers, but they also are building a resume against top 50 and top 100 type teams. That's also solid as well. And it's easy to think of a team like rated between 50 and 100 as like, that's not that strong. But remember, there's over 400 teams in Division III basketball. So you're talking about teams, your opponents are all in the top 25% of team quality when you're talking about top 100 games. So I think that's an easy cutoff line, like top 100 wins. Those are all go in the quality bucket for us, I think, when you're talking about a team's solid resume.
You mentioned the top 50 rating. That's what jumped out to me, right? This isn't a team that's kind of relying on one end of the court or the other, an adjusted defensive efficiency that's in the top 25 already, and an offensive number that's in the top 50. And they're kind of getting it done both ways, right? Like the computer is looking at some subpar competition they've played, but posted big margins and, liking that. And then also putting up some good results against legitimate competition, right? So I don't think there's really anything to pick at here. It's just a matter of seeing, like, is this going to be the Cortland team we continue to see throughout the year? Certainly a great foundation, and we'll see. Yeah, I think this is one, Matt. I'd have to say everything I'm seeing here, like this seems very much at least like a watch list type team. How are you thinking about Cortland as a voter? Even if you're not, we just saw your ballot. You're not voting for them this week, but it seems like this could be the week that maybe they do pop in that
Yeah.
others receiving votes category, or maybe they just, get into enough where they're in one of those, final like
Right.
20 to 25 spots.
I think it's probably difficult for a team to go from not receiving votes to in the top 25 in 1 week without maybe some really, really eye-popping type results. I don't think Cortland has those, because even a win, like look at the resume here. St. Joseph, Connecticut is a good computer win, but it's outside the human top 25. Things, Farmingdale, right, outside, Oswego State outside. So maybe the humans wouldn't really see like an eye-popping top 25 win, but they're definitely a watch list type of team for me. Um, it's a caveat for all these teams. Most of these teams have played 7, 8, 9 games or something like that, so it's still a fairly small sample size. We have to see what's going to go on from here. I wouldn't be surprised if Cortland starts getting some votes. We saw that they weren't in my top 25 this week, but they're definitely, I mentioned all these teams, like all the way to 35 or so, that they're all pretty even. Cortland's in that mix for me. I've been watching them, especially like this week. They're on my kind of like next 10 list, right there. So definitely we'll be watching them closely to see what they do from here on out, and would not be surprised to see them start picking up deserved votes right at this point.
Probably also worth pointing out, ranked 14th here in our efficiency ratings, but there's not necessarily like widespread agreement whether you're looking at Jacob Shower's ratings that
Yeah.
he kind of launched for this season, the Massey ratings. Those aren't quite as high on Cortland. So maybe this view is a little bit more specific to kind of what's coming through in our computer. Um, so yeah, it's good. It's a good point. Is this the type of team though that you kind of see this spit out, and that helps inform that maybe it is a team you should be
Yeah.
paying a little bit more attention to that you otherwise might have?
Yeah, and I use, like, no surprise, where I use computer systems all the time to form my opinions of teams. Look at the Jacob Shower ratings, I look at the Massey ratings, or look at our own ratings. I think the best version for me is when you take those and you kind of average them, and then you can kind of see. But if a team is high on any one of those, they're automatically on my watch list. If you're like a top 30 or so team in any of those computer systems, I'm putting you in. I'm paying attention to what you're doing, because if one computer like really likes that team, then there's something there that I got to be paying attention to as well.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Okay, next up, Matt, we have Gustavus Adolphus out of the MIAC.
Yeah, Gustavus was a team that finished really strongly last year. Well, I think they were the first team out of the tournament, but they had a strong MIAC season. I wasn't sure what to make of them this year. They've started really strong out of the gate. Number 20 by our computer, 6-1 overall. They've beaten UW Platteville. Now, that's not the same UW Platteville as the last several seasons, but still probably like a top 50 type team, a team that's still been getting top 25 votes. They've beaten Hamlin, maybe a team that I thought is one of their other top conference competition in the MIAC. And then their only loss is to Whitworth, a top 100 team, another team that's been getting top 25 votes as well. So a strong resume so far here for Gustavus, 7 games in. And another team, like we've seen, kind of pretty balanced offensively and defensively. They're not elite in either one of those, but they're very good in both. And a balanced team like that is going to be rated highly in our computer system.
Mm-hmm. And this is one that there is more agreement among kind of the prominent computer systems here, with Shower has them 33rd, and the Massey ratings, they're 30th. So you can take 20, 33, 30. I always find it really interesting when there's, pretty good agreement between computer rating systems on a team, and that's what we see here with Gustavus Adolphus.
Yeah. Yep.
Next up, Matt, another power conference team here, Carnegie Mellon in the UAA.
Yeah, Carnegie Mellon is 7-1. Our computer system has them at the number 21 team in the country with a plus 20 efficiency margin. They've got a lot of top 100 games. They've beaten Bowdoin, NESCAC team, who the computer likes, at number 29. Their only loss, I think that was opening night against Muskingum, who's been a really good OAC team, right? That has a really strong record so far this year. Computer has them at number 61. They've beaten W&J, the computer's number 68 team. They've beaten Denison, the number 71 team. They've beaten Middlebury, the number 96 team. It's not a resume loaded with top 25 types of teams, but basically every game that they've played has been a team of reasonably good quality. And I think that's another way to build a resume. It's really easy to find the big sexy games, the big sexy wins that some teams have out there. But when you just are kind of quietly playing teams that are top 100 quality, kind of night in and night out, and you're getting wins in most of those, that's a pretty good sign that you're a good team. That's what Carnegie Mellon has been doing so far this year, and it's pretty impressive. They're honestly a team that hasn't, even at 21, hasn't been that highly on my radar. But doing an episode like this, putting this together, is like, oh shoot, like Carnegie Mellon is right there. They should be in the mix. I got to be making sure that I'm, giving them every bit of consideration that I'm giving any other team.
It has me thinking about some of like the psychological effects of the top 25 or an individual's ballot. Because on one hand, I feel like certain power conferences, if you're one of those teams and you've got a great record, you kind of have a lower bar to clear than maybe a team that has a great looking record that's from a conference that doesn't get as much publicity. Yet on the other hand, for an individual voter, you're like, if I'm voting for Wash U and I'm voting for Emory and I'm voting for, you go down the line, like, am I going to be voting for four, five, six teams
Yeah.
from the same conference? Maybe there you feel like you want to cut it off, deserving or not, to kind of spread things out a little bit more. And maybe that's where a Carnegie Mellon kind of falls. So it's always kind of interesting to me when there's a power conference team like a Carnegie Mellon who has over the last few years been in and around like the top 25 picture at times. To be here 71, doing things the computer likes, but to have not cracked a single ballot yet is a little bit interesting. And that's what gets me to wonder, is it just because maybe in the overall UAA pecking order they're not quite they're just too far down the list that there's just too many options, too many ways
Yeah.
that an individual voter could go before they want to add another UAA team to the ballot.
Yeah. And I think for all of these teams, when you look at some of their top 100 type wins, some of the names are a little bit different than you might used to be seeing. Like Bowdoin at number 29, like, oh, okay, that's maybe a little higher than I would have thought. NESCAC's another one of those leagues, right? Like a middle-ish tier NESCAC team. Are they number 29? Like maybe. Our computer really likes a lot of the NESCAC teams right now, whether they've played high-quality teams or not. And Bowdoin has played some good teams. But I think maybe part of it is in the early season, we're still, especially as humans, really still latched on to what was our expectations preseason and last year. And I think maybe you see the slowest to react on some of these teams who we only kind of expected to be maybe a second or third tier type team, and that they've had a lot of early momentum. It's maybe difficult to trust a small sample size more than a team that you've seen as good last year and is still good, or still kind of a similar quality, like a 7-1 team that was really good last year versus a 7-1 team that was a step back last year. You're going to maybe give the benefit of the doubt to the team who you saw being good more recently, I think.
Makes sense. Let's go on to our next one here. Out of the Little East Conference, Eastern Connecticut.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some good Eastern Connecticut seasons in the past. They're another one that has kind of snuck up on me at number 27. I guess they've snuck up on all of us, right? These are teams that have not gotten a top 25 vote. But to see now, right, like 6, 7, 8 games into the season, that they've starting to put together a good resume here. Their one loss, Zach, is to a pretty good team, Trinity, Connecticut. So if you almost like just give any team a benefit of the doubt for like, oh yeah, you're going to lose to Trinity, then what's the rest of their resume, right? They beat Conn College, an SCAC team. They beat Western New England, a team that's been in the tournament last year and has been strong this year. Two teams that are in the top 100 as well. So Eastern Connecticut out of the Little East, I think putting together a pretty good resume there at 7-1, especially if you kind of like look past. You can lose to Trinity by a lot of points and still be kind of a pretty good team in the computer's eyes. Really good offensive numbers so far. Defensive numbers aren't as strong for the computer, but it's been a lot of like Keene State and Western Connecticut in the Little East in many years. So nice to see Eastern Connecticut popping back into the fold here, maybe as well.
And you say you can lose to Trinity by a lot. Well, they did. It was a 30-point loss.
Yeah.
But again, for people who have followed our efficiency ratings for a while, if you're looking at that number that Trinity's putting up right now, it is just astronomical. Like, putting them 1 and then someone 2 just doesn't do justice, right? I think that gap from 1 to 2 is like the difference from 2 to, almost near the bottom of the top 25, right? So maybe losing by 30 is not that bad.
I think if you lose to Trinity by 30, our computer would say you're not necessarily a below average team.
Yeah.
Like that's
crazy.
just how crazy Trinity is right now.
Few more to go here, Matt. Another NESCAC. You mentioned that the computer's really liking quite a bit of what's going on in the NESCAC so far. Another team out of that conference that is in that top 10 that hasn't been receiving any top 25 votes yet, and that's Bowdoin.
Yeah, Bowdoin, an interesting inclusion here at 6-3, and still number 29 by our computer. Their 3 losses you can see on the screen are all within the top 100. They lost to Bates, who the computer sees at number 12, and they have gotten some top 25 votes there. They lost to Carnegie Mellon, a team that we've already talked about. They beat Rochester, here, a team that we might be talking about on the next slide. And then they lost to Brandeis. So all power conference type schools. You'd like to see them maybe have won some of those games, but here, this is an example of maybe what I was talking about in the previous slide. So part of how you think of Bowdoin depends on how you think of Bates. The computer is pretty high on Bates at 12, so that loss is not very bad. The computer is also very high on Carnegie Mellon, so that loss is not very bad. So if, right, we're still early in the season, I've been talking about small sample sizes. If those two teams, right, like a Bates and a Carnegie Mellon, or even a Rochester, if they start to slide a little bit, then you're going to see Bowdoin's resume slide, even if Bowdoin doesn't do anything quote unquote wrong coming up. It's just that these teams are highly rated. Not all of them, right, are teams putting up margins against weaker opponents like we saw from Amherst, but there's maybe some of that. And with only 8 or 9 games on teams' slate, then a 10th game is kind of 1/10 of their resume. So things can change pretty quickly at this point in the season. But interesting here, it's still 40, more than 40% of their games have been versus top 100 competition. They've won one of those with a top 50 game. Would like to maybe see more wins there, but they've obviously done enough that the computer thinks that they're pretty good. And for them, it's been defensive, right? The computer sees their defense as quite strong and their offense is kind of only so-so.
So if we put the question here, Matt, is Bowdoin rankable as a top 25 voter? This is a case that with a 6-3 record, all 3 of those losses coming, 3 out of their 4 toughest games, probably not what a human voter would be looking for. But again, this is kind of the distinction between human voter top 25 and a computer might look at that. And if it was a close game, then you're on par, kind of very much like this other top team, right? So it's a little bit, it's trying to look at more about the margin and less about the actual record.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of trying to size up a team and where they stack up.
Yeah, and even here, right at number 29, our computer is not saying rank them. It's for Bowdoin, it's saying watch them, right? So keep an eye on what are they doing here. Can they be in the maybe top tier NESCAC, or are they still mid tier NESCAC? We'll have to see.
Moving on, the next one that you already teased, Matt, it's Rochester. Very interesting because here we're recording Sunday night. Earlier in the day, Bowdoin and Rochester actually played head to head. Interesting about that one is the computer prediction that we have on our website had that one as Bowdoin as a 2-point advantage. The game ended up a Bowdoin 2-point win. So from the computer's perspective, that game played out, basically as expected. So coming out of it, didn't really do a whole lot to shake up Bowdoin, at least in terms of how they stack up with Rochester.
Yeah, and an expected result like that just kind of reinforces where the two teams are relative to each other. It doesn't really shift them in that aspect here. So Rochester, the number 30th team by our computer, 7-2 record. They have beaten Cortland, which was a team we already talked about on this list. Their loss was to Bowdoin today, and then they also lost earlier to Hobart. That efficiency margin on the screen is incorrect. They are not plus 30. I thought I updated that one, but they would be a different number that I will find in a moment here and say it on the podcast. So Rochester is ranked number 30, and they are plus 17.9 efficiency margin. So not plus 30. That would be a tremendous number for them. So 2 losses, both inside the top 100. They're another team that's building a resume. It's been interesting to me, Zach. We've seen kind of a bunch of like UAA type teams, NESCAC type teams on this list, and you wonder why these conferences get so many bids come tournament time, and it's because they win so many games in the non-conference. Here, Rochester is like something between the 4th and 6th best UAA team probably this season, and they're 7-2. So like, what are the rest of the conference doing? When you get so many of these wins, and you get so many of these wins against kind of top 100-ish type teams, and you're playing those types of teams, That's why you see like 4 UAAs in and 4 or 5 NESCACs in. It's because these power conferences win a bunch of their non-conference games. It's not just because they're overrated by some metric. I mean, they might be a little bit, but they're winning a bunch of games, and they got a bunch of teams doing that. And Rochester is one of these teams as well, getting it done offensively, 37th ranked offense, and still a top 100 type defense. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the fascinating things out of the UAA is we think we know who like kind of the top 3 type teams are in that conference. But can Rochester break into that group, and then how deep does the league go? I think all of them are basically top 100 ish, but just like how many can get into the tournament or be in that kind of top 50 ish kind of frame.
If you take the 4 that have been getting votes, plus we already talked about Carnegie Mellon, that's 5. So here we're talking about Rochester, 6. That's 6 of the 8 teams in uh, in the UAA that either have already been ranked or receiving votes, or here we're talking
Yeah,
about as the computer sees the top 10 teams that haven't, right? So it just speaks to that depth. And Matt, real sort of a bounce back year for Rochester. Just 7 wins total last year. Already 7 wins
yeah,
here.
it's
Just
nice.
as we're recording here, the end of the first week of December, heading into the second week of December. So very much Rochester back in the mix in the UAA and nationally. All right, that they were 30th by the computer. One more spot down is Otterbein, 31st so far as ranked by the computer. Has not received any votes. Off to a good start there, though they have taken an important OAC loss to Mount Union, but that's another team the computer really
Yeah,
likes.
right. And so that's not a terrible loss there to Mount Union. They have also lost to Denison, and then they have a win over Wittenberg. Wittenberg is a team on the rise by the computers that they have some good wins in their own right. But yeah, Otterbein in the Ohio Athletic Conference, they're 5-2. Like almost an exactly like 50th ranked offense and defense. So another team that's pretty even here. Interesting dynamic in the OAC that we've talked about all season long, and we will continue to with John Carroll having exited to the NCAC. Kind of what's the new mix there in that conference? Mount Union looks really strong. Otterbein is one of those teams that I think will be challenging them. Already taken the one loss, so they'll have to maybe try to win the second game there. But Otterbein's one of these teams that could be in the mix either to win that league or challenge for the tournament championship or then be in the at-large mix. This is a conference that had historically gotten 2 or 3 teams into the tournament. Can they get back to that point? Is it going to be someone like a Mount Union and Otterbein in whatever order that is? But they look like a team that could be kind of challenging for that type of resume this year.
Another conference, Matt, as I'm just doing a quick scan here, it looks like 7 of the 9 teams in the OAC currently have winning records.
Yeah.
So a conference that's doing well in non-conference play. And Muskingum's off to a good
Yep.
start. Otterbein here. So despite the loss of John Carroll, very much in play for the OAC to return to being or to stay as a multi-bid league.
Yeah.
Okay, another team here that hasn't gotten any votes, Matt, but is one that is no stranger to the top 25, and that's Swarthmore in the Centennial. 5-3 records so far, but you know, some good wins, some reasonable losses, maybe a couple that they'd like back in turn that maybe holding back their human evaluation as far as them as a top 25 team. Let's talk about Swarthmore.
Yeah, interesting to see a team kind of in on this episode here that's 5-3. I think we've talked about another 3-loss team already, but number 35, Swarthmore, they lost to Johns Hopkins this week, but that's a good team. They have 2 losses just outside of the top 100, Misericordia and Stockton. You would to be a team to really consider. I haven't really been considering Swarthmore. You probably don't want to have those losses on your resume right now, at least 2 of those without some offsettingly high wins. But still, I think a good team to watch. This is exactly the type of team that can probably beat anyone in the country or compete with anyone in the country, and you don't want to have to play them in a must-win game. But maybe will be, at least for now, just outside of the top 25 or just kind of outside of that watch list range, at least for me. But definitely a dangerous team and a team worth watching.
We'll wrap up here with Arcadia, the 10th team in our list here in terms of the top 10 teams that have not received a top 25 vote. And Matt, this is one that's interesting because I'm not actually really seeing kind of maybe what the computer is seeing in Arcadia. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts here. Another 5-3 record here. All 3 of those losses there are in the top 100, but it's not like overall they've got a huge strength of schedule. If you look at the efficiency ratings based strength of schedule, just 110 in the non-conference, right? So it's a 5-3 record against kind of a top quartile ish, fringe top quartile strength of schedule. What do you think about Arcadia? Aside from obviously, the defensive number here is elite in the top 10, but it's not necessarily paired with a great offensive number. What do you think's going on here with Arcadia? Because I think this is interesting.
Yeah, this is interesting one because it's not a resume that would pop out at all to human voters. And again, they are number 36, so it would be outside. If you think of your top 25 plus a 10 team watch list, like this would even be outside of that. But it's still interestingly high for a 5-3 team with really no super good wins. Here's maybe how the computer's seeing it though. All of the other wins are by double digits, so they haven't really messed around too much by any lower rated teams. W&J, that's a team we saw up close and in person. That is good. The computer has them solidly as a top 100 team. That is a 2-point loss on a neutral court. So that kind of says like they're about as good as that team. The York loss was by 6 points on the road, and that's a team that the computer thinks is really good. So that's another kind of like you're a little bit behind that team. Alvernia is another top 100 team. That was 11-point loss on the road, so that's kind of a little bit of a step back. But kind of overall, it's one of these resumes that, again, a human probably wouldn't even watch list them. I'm personally not even really watch listing Arcadia right now, if I can out myself in saying that, because again, I personally would want to see them do it against a team that I would also be considering. But it's overall against the types of teams that they've played, and the margins that they've played them against. The computer says like Arcadia is probably a good team. Again, we're only 8 games into the season, so number 36 might not be where they stay, but I bet you they stay in a range of being a good team all season long. And you're also in the point of the rankings where a few points of efficiency margin makes a really big difference into where you actually land. So like 2 points of efficiency margin would put you 2 points higher would put you all the way up to like number 20, and 2 points lower would put you down to like 45. So you can swing 10 spots either way, 10 or 15 spots either way, just by a couple of points of efficiency margin. And you have one really good or one really bad game this point in the season, and you can swing that far. So maybe we caught Arcadia at just the right time. But yeah, that's kind of maybe how the computer is trying to see things in the background.
That will put them, as like a favorite in the MAC Freedom. So
Yeah.
going to be a team to follow, at least in the MAC Freedom race there. So interesting to see what happens, and interesting to see as future ballots take place, how many of these teams end up receiving votes. Because I think, again, as history has shown us, there's going to be at least a few that will, if not outright, break into the top 25. And even again, like maybe an Arcadia doesn't, but with how they're positioned or seem to be positioned there in the MAC Freedom, could be a team we're talking about at tournament time anyway. Okay, Matt, let's look at the picks. I hesitate to go on to the picks because I'm not going to like what you're about to go through, but take us through it anyway.
Yeah, last week our first game was WPI at Babson. This was a half-point line. I took WPI, Zach, you took Babson, but WPI won by 5, so I get that point. We had another push, Hamlin and Gustavus Adolphus. This was a 5-point line, and it was exactly 5. So either side, neither of us would have won this. We just kind of tie that pick. Illinois Wesleyan and Carthage went into overtime. Illinois Wesleyan won by 4, and it was a good thing they did because this was a 3-point line. So Illinois Wesleyan ends up covering that computer line, and I get the point, Zach, and you did not get that point. Williams and Wesleyan, a NESCAC, I think, non-conference rivalry game here. This was a 9-point line. It was a big number. You just took the points and ran with it, but it was an 11-point game in actuality, so Wesleyan does cover that computer line, and I got the point there. And Zach, the D3 Datacast game of the week was another big line that I was not afraid of. 8.5 points in favor of Randolph-Macon, but as we already mentioned, they won that game by 35. Another game that you just went with the big number. And I was not afraid of it, and I got the point there. So if you were following along closely, you realize that
I
Zach
took the point. I tried taking the points and running with it. I took the points and got ran over with it. Is what happened this week.
And you end up getting no points as you went 0-4-1 to bring you to 11 and 13 and 1 on the season. I went 4-0 and 1 and end up 19-5 and 1 so far on the season. So let's go to this week. I know we've got a lot of people playing along with us at home. So as always, send us your picks on social media or post them below in the comments. Here are this week's picks. Zach, game number 1, Swarthmore half-point underdogs on the road at Farmingdale State. How do you see this game?
I'm not taking the points. Give me Farmingdale State.
Okay, Zach, that's
Not the points, the half point.
the half a point. I mean, you're basically just picking the winner here, just showing who the slight favorite is, though. I'm going to go with Swarthmore. They're a team that we talked about as a team kind of on the fringes of maybe relevancy, despite being not having any votes. This is a tough game. We've seen Farmingdale State win good games. They've beaten Wesleyan already on the year. That's a team that's been in the top 25. But half point line, I'm going to see what SWAT can do on the road and go against you at the same time. Down in Texas, we have a good game here. Hardin-Simmons at Laterno. This is a pick 'em by the computer, so it sees it as kind of dead even. What's your pick?
I'm going to go with Hardin-Simmons. This is just a really interesting dynamic here because these two teams are playing back-to-back. Hardin-Simmons got the win over Laterno at home. But, by the time you re-roll it, adjust for the home, that previous result, was still a point or two in the favor of Hardin-Simmons. So I'll go against the computer seeing this as an even game because I do not believe it will end in a tie, and I will take Hardin-Simmons to emerge victorious.
Hopefully we do not see this game end 17-17, but I will also pick Hardin-Simmons in this game. I think, to me, they're a team that just has to start getting some more positive results some way or another. I think that this is going to be it. So picking them to win straight up, I know it's on the road, but give me Hardin-Simmons. Going out to the American Rivers Conference for our third game, Wartburg, 4-point underdogs at Loras. Zach, your pick.
A couple teams that are off to a good start. And so this, I think, is really shaping up to be an important American Rivers game here. Just one loss for each team. But I think if I look side by side, I prefer the Loras resume so far to the Wartburg resume. So give me Loras.
Yeah, I was trying to play the resume game on this one as well. I ended up thinking the same thing. I think the line's about right. It's about where I would place it if I were a computer as well. But I think, like you said, Loras's resume is just a little bit better. I think they've played some a little bit stronger competition so far and gotten some good wins in that. So 4 points, I think that's good enough for me to give up those points and say Loras can win by more than 4. All right, we were talking about the OAC earlier. Here's an OAC contest. Mount Union, big favorites on the road. Mount Union by 9.5 at Muskingum. How do you pick?
I'm going to go with the Muskies. The computer loves Mount Union. Maybe the computer is right, but I just think there's always the chance, as we've talked about some of these other ones, that maybe in the early season the computer is loving a team a little too much. Muskingum clearly looks like a program on the rise. So with a big number here, a big number with a home dog, I'll take Muskingum.
Yeah, Zach, I like Muskingum at home as well, especially with this big of a computer spread. This is going to be a prove-it game for someone, right? Is Mount Union really as good as the computer thinks they are, or is Muskingum going to be that legitimate contender in the OAC? I think this is a fascinating result either way. But yeah, I think 9.5 just feels like it's too big on the road, so give me Muskingum here at home. And Zach, our D3 Datacast game of the week is a new NCAC conference clash. Wabash, 1.5-point underdogs on the road at John Carroll. Two teams we've seen getting top 25 votes at times this season. How do you pick?
This is a big one because someone here is going to pick up a second loss in conference play. Did they have a conference game earlier in the week? No, they don't. It's John Carroll's. It's John Carroll's next game. Okay. So, I mean, both of them already have a conference loss early in the season. John Carroll lost to Wittenberg. I think he made reference to that. Wabash is 1-1 in conference play. So this is a big one for a couple teams that you think will be in the mix there in the NCAC. So whoever can avoid the second loss here, I think that'll be big. So let me go with the home team here. As you know, I'm always going to lean towards a home team in conference play. Give me the Blue Streaks.
Yeah, Zach, these are two teams for me that are approximately NCAA tournament quality, so it's going to be a great game. But I'm thinking similar to you. Home team, pretty even. Give me the team that's, favored by a little bit less than a bucket, I think that they can win this game, and I think they win it even by 2 or 3, right? You get the point there. So that's going to mean you and I go the same direction on 4 games this week. So it's just the SWAT Farmingdale State game that's going to maybe separate us for the week. That's the picks.
That's the picks, Matt. No mailbag this week, so let's get out of here with a word of thanks, as always, to our great supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/D3 Datacast. Matt, everything we do, we put out there for everyone to enjoy. There are no paywalls here. Everything that we do data-wise is available on d3datacast.com without any paywalls, without any ads on the site. To try to make that experience as great as possible. It's there for everyone. And so we're grateful to have the support of these people on screen here who make it possible for us to do that, provide that for the entire community, keep us going, doing what we do and what we love.
Yeah, no new members to shout out this week, but maybe that can be you next week if you want to join us at patreon.com/D3Datacast. That would be just swell. But Zach, had a great time talking about these teams this week. But for now, we're going to say, good job, team.